Okay, Talmud class for Tamid, our fourth class. Let us now continue our discussion. Just to finish off, if you recall, the Mishnah had stated the fact that the Talmud, that the Kohanic vestments that the Kohanim would wear during the service, those special vestments, at night, they would not be on the Kohanim, they would be under their heads, or as some sages wanted to reinterpret, near their heads. And the big difference between saying under their heads or near their heads had halachic significance. Either if you say that those vestments could double over as pillows under their heads, that means you're essentially telling me that those vestments, although they are sacred, are actually allowed to be used outside of their normal service. You're just not allowed to sleep in them, but you're still allowed to utilize them. However, the sages who want to interpret the Mishnah to say near their heads are saying near their heads. Why? Because as we described in the last class, because of kilayim, because of the prohibition of wool and linen together, utilizing wool and linen together, and therefore they say there's no indication in our Mishnah, there is no proof in our Mishnah to say, to derive, to infer that you're allowed to utilize the Kohanic vestments outside of their normative service, because our Mishnah obviously says near their head and not under their head. So we have a Gemara debate on what the Mishnah intended. So now the Gemara is going to say, let me bring you a proof to one side of the debate. Tashma, come in here. I'm going to now bring a brisa. If you recall, a brisa is of the same era as the Mishnah. They are the same language as the Mishnah, and they are written and compiled by the same sages as the Mishnah. Just it is a different book. It is all those statements, sayings, and traditions which didn't make it in, were not canonized in the Mishnah proper, due to some technical, to some technical reasons, because the compiler of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, wanted that the Mishnah should be so precise in its wording and so exact in its tradition, and every single statement in there had to be validated 100,000 times. I don't know what kind of process he went through, that anything that didn't meet the bar was put in the brisa. Not to say that the brisa is any less significant, but it's less authoritative because it's less validated. You can put it that way. But just to understand that the Mishnah bar for what went into the Mishnah was so high that if you're in the brisa, you're pretty good also. So the Gemara, which is a commentator on the Mishnah, will quote the brisa many times, because the brisa will give extra. The flip side of not being so precise and exact in its wording is that it has a lot more information. And so by quoting the brisa, you can figure out a lot more information, which can help us in our quest of understanding the Mishnah. Okay, so says the brisa, Tashma, come and hear. Do you see the screen? Wait a second. You guys see the screen, correct? Okay, let's do this. Oh, there you go. Tashma, listen to this brisa. Big de kahona, the vestments of the Kohanim. Hayotz behem l'medina. If you want to go out with them to the country, meaning if you want to go out of the Beis Hamikdash, you want to go out to the rest of the country with them, Asr. It's forbidden. You're not allowed to go out of the temple with those vestments. They must remain in the temple. B'mikdash, in the temple, bein b'shas havayda, uvein shaloi b'shas havayda. In the temple, whether you are right now currently in the service, or whether you are not currently in the service, mutar, it is allowed, it is permitted to wear Because the big kahuna, the vestments of Kohanim, are allowed to be utilized. You're allowed to derive benefit from them. And therefore, we have a clear brisa that settles our argument that we had how to interpret the Mishnah, that the vestments of the Kohanim are allowed to be utilized, even not during the service, but you must never take them out of the Beis HaMikdash. That's the only limitations. The Gemara says, Shma Mina, and the Gemara ends off with that. Shma Mina, meaning settled. It is settled. Okay. This brisa really does settle this debate that the vestments of the Kohanim are allowed to be used even not during the service proper. Now the Gemara asks, wait a second, I take nothing for granted. Hold on a second. This brisa itself I need to understand. Uva Medina lie, and taking it out, taking it to the outside of the temple is not allowed, is not permitted. I have a question from another brisa. Vatanya, didn't we learn B'chaf Aleph Bai that in the 21st day of Teves, Yom Har Grizim, it is the day of Har Grizim, the day that the Jewish people coming out of the desert, about to enter the land of Israel, stood on Mount Grizim, where the Kohanim, on behalf of Hashem, gave them the blessings, as we're going to learn in the Parsha soon. The Loyal Mispad says the Gemara, it's a day that you're not allowed to make a hesped, you're not allowed to make a eulogy during a person's funeral, as it says in the tractate of Yuma, Perek by Loika and Gadol Karav, as it says in the tractate of Yuma, which deals with the laws of Yom Kippur, another tractate of the Talmud, and over there it recounts that on that day, the day that the people stood on the 21st of Tevet, the people stood on Mount Gerizim, it was established as a festive day. And there are certain dates on the calendar where even if someone was having a funeral, then we refrain from eulogizing because they are festive days. Like, for example, on Chol HaMoed, when you're burying someone during the holiday, you're not allowed to, you obviously need to bury them, but eulogies should be done afterwards, not during the funeral, because they're festive days. What does this show us? That on this day was a festive day. Okay? Now, so what's the problem? That the Bryce says, basically, here is the background information. The Bryce is saying that on that day it was established a holiday because, as the Brisa continues, there was a fascinating story that happened with Alexander the Great and the great tzaddik, the great righteous person of his time, Shimon HaTzaddik, Shimon the righteous, one of the only people that goes down in Jewish history and Jewish tradition who has the appendix HaTzaddik attached to his name, even though there were many tzaddikim. Such a righteous person he was. And the story is that Alexander the Great was conquering the world, one nation after the next, and he already conquered Egypt, and he was making his way to the Holy Land, to the land of Israel. At the time, this is the time of the Second Temple, there was a great tzaddik, his name is Shimon, who was the Kohen Gadol, the high priest. He was not just a high priest, he was also the president of the Supreme Court. He was also the de facto political leader of the Jewish people, even though they didn't have a normal political system of their own right, but he was the representative of the Jews in the land of Israel. And Alexander the Great was coming with his army, and the Jewish people were extremely frightened. The news already spread that this very young, he was in his 20s, Alexander the Great was a vicious and ruthless conqueror. And so the Jews decided that they're going to plan this out, that Shimon, the high priest, Shimon HaTzaddik, is going to have a diplomatic discussion with Alexander the Great, that he shouldn't come and destroy as he comes in to conquer. They weren't going to fight him. They're going to try to work with diplomacy. And as the story goes, Alexander the Great, who was famous for riding before his troops and not behind his troops, came towards Jerusalem, and Shimon HaTzadik came out of Jerusalem to meet him. And Shimon HaTzadik watched as this holy man walked down the path from the holy city, and they met on the path, and Alexander the Great, in front of all of his generals, comes down off of the horse and bows to Shimon HaTzadik, and he tells the people around him, this man appears to me in a dream every night before battle, and I win every single night. This man is obviously a special man. And Shimon HaTzadik told Alexander the Great that we welcome you to this land. Please protect us. Do not destroy us. We're not here to fight you. And from then on, Alexander the Great takes over the political. He becomes the owner of Eretz Yisrael in the political sense. But in terms of all other temporal matters, the Jews ran their own show and they ran their own state. And there was peace, and the Jews were saved from the onslaught of Alexander the Great, which all other nations suffered greatly as he went and conquered the world. So that is just a fascinating story. Now, the Gemara tells us that Shimon HaTzadik went out of Jerusalem wearing the vestments of the Kohen Gadol, wearing the vestments of the high priest, in order to impress the great general coming his way. And so therefore we have a question. How can you say that you can't take the Kohanic vestments out of Jerusalem, out of the temple even, if you have over here a case where you see one of the greatest Kohanim of all generations did so? Okay, so now the Gemara has to answer. Two possible answers. If you want, I could just answer, Ru'uyin Haim, the big Kahuna. He was wearing vestments that were proper for Big Kahuna. They were appropriate. They could have technically been used. They were sewn and created in the same exact fashion as the Kohanic vestments. However, he was wearing fake. They weren't actually used in the temple. He had a costume which looked exactly like it, and they could have been used in the temple, just were never. That's one answer. Another answer, another answer I can say, as it states in Tehillim, a very famous verse, there are times that in order to defend Hashem, in order to do for God, we have to desecrate the Torah, which means that there are certain laws, and this does not apply to all laws, obviously. It doesn't apply. There are certain minor elements of Torah, of tradition, which are prone to be suspended if it comes a time when it's to properly safeguard the entirety of Torah as a whole. And so, although they are prohibited, these are laws that could be suspended if need be, and one of them is taking out the vestments of the Kohen from the temple. It's prohibited, but at a time of great need, like, for example, saving the entire country, and this could have been a big factor, the fact that he comes out with his very regal regalia to meet the great general, that could have been a tremendous factor in terms of this meeting. So in order to literally save the Jewish people and for the horrible fate that they would face before Alexander the Great's army, so this law is being suspended. But you should not infer from that one particular story, which was a unique circumstance, to all of life. Usually the law is you cannot take out the Kohanic vestments from the temple, and that law stands and the law remains true. That brisa, the first brisa, was 100% correct. We do not repeal that. It stands. And the fact that Shimon HaTzadik did so was for a unique circumstance. Now let us continue. Back to our Mishnah, back to the barrack, back to the Kohanim sleeping in the barrack. What did we say? What happens if one of them encounters an impurity in the middle of the night? We said that he gets up, he goes down to the basement, he goes down to the tunnels of the Beis HaMikdash, and he walks down the hallways and he finds the mikvah, the ritual bath. He goes to mikvah, then he goes back up to the barrack, goes to sleep, and in the morning, he could leave and go home. He's not fit to service in the Beis HaMikdash that day, but he goes home, and unfortunately, he has to give up his shift for that moment. So says the Gemara, here is a unique circumstance where the Gemara is not going to challenge, is not going to tear apart. The Gemara is going to say, actually, this Mishnah, this statement is a support, is a very, very good support for a Gemara statement, because what happens is if two Gemara sages are in a debate, if one of them can prove that the Mishnah, which was the earlier generations, if the Mishnah agrees with them, they win the debate. That's obviously an obvious rule here in the Gemara, because the Gemara sages, their entire premise here is we are here to debate and discuss what the Mishnah said. So if one of them, if they're debating and discussing an issue, and one of them brings another Mishnah and says, hey, if there's another Mishnah that works with me, that says I'm right, then obviously he wins. So, this is a great support for Rabbi Yechanan, who's one of the earlier Gemara, which, by the way, the correct terminology, which I'll use from now on, is Amoraic, Amora, and Amora. There's a Tana, who is a sage from the Mishnah, and then there's Amora, which is an Aramaic term, a sage from the Gemara. Okay, Tana means a person who learns. Amora means a person who speaks. But this is in Hebrew, this is in Aramaic, so it's very befitting. So there's an Amoraic sage, Rabbi Yechanan, one of the earlier ones, who said, who had a tradition, that the tunnels beneath the Temple Mount were not sanctified, did not have the same sanctity of the temple itself. And number two, a person who's a Balkari, a person who has an impurity emission coming from their own body during the night, he must leave both machanes, he must leave both encampments, which means that not only can he not remain in the temple, he cannot remain on the Temple Mount. As we described, that the Temple Mount is also sanctified, is also holy, but not to the degree as the temple itself. So some sages held that if you had an impurity, you cannot be in the temple, but you can still be in the Temple Mount. Says Rabbi Yechanan, no, you have to leave the Temple Mount. You must go. You could either be in Jerusalem or in other places or go straight home, but you cannot be even on the Temple Mount. And this Mishnah supports him, because what does the Mishnah say? Number one, the Mishnah says that he could go down into the tunnels to go to mikvah, and we don't tell him to leave right away. What does that prove? That proves that the tunnels down under the temple do not have the same sanctity as on top of the temple, as the actual temple courtyard. So you're allowed to go under the temple. And number two, when in the morning, when the doors open in the morning and it is time to either go to the service or go home, he must exit the temple, not just exit the temple, but exit the Temple Mount. Now the Mishnah continued. What happens when he's going down these tunnels to the mikvah? We described mikan umikan v'chulu. We described that there were lamps on either side, and then there was a restroom. There was underground a bathroom, and the bathroom was called Beis HaKavod. Was called the Chamber of Honor, of Dignity. Why was it called Chamber of Dignity? Because it had a lock on it, which was not a given in ancient times. Bathrooms were along the way. In middle of the desert, middle of the forest, there were no such thing as bathrooms. The temple was innovative for its time, that it actually had a chamber that was used as a bathroom. Completely innovative. And over there was a lock on the door. Wow, no one ever heard such a thing, a lock on the door. Now we take it for granted. Back in the day, there was no lock on the door. And so therefore it was called the Room of Dignity. Because in the Temple Mount, they needed an extra degree of dignity. There's a lock on the door. If it's locked, there's someone in there, you don't go in. If it's open, you could go in. Again, this may sound comical to us because it's like, that's someone who doesn't lock the door, as someone who defecates outside. He's not normal. He's not normal. But back in the day, it was exact opposite. That was the way people went. People went to the restroom or used the bathroom, and the temple was unique. So Rav Safra. So now we're going to say a story that happened to two Amoraic sages. One time, Rav Safra Rav Safra was in the bathroom, was in the restroom. Also, Rav Abba came along, Nacharle, and he coughed outside in order to respectfully see if there's anyone inside. So he was outside the bathroom, and he gave a cough like this, and Amrle, Rav Safra said, Leomar, come inside. Pasadanafik, after he came inside, Amrle, Rab Abba said to him, Atkan slikas l'shayir gamra mili. He gave him a very, very, very sharp comment. A very, very sharp comment. Listen to what he says. That until now, you have never entered Seir. You have never went into the nation. You never went into the culture of Edom. Seir is the biblical reference, the biblical town of Edom, who were a nation that were known to be quite immoral, immodest. So he says, until now, you have never went in Seir. You never went, it's kind of like you say Vegas has a certain name for itself, right? Or Paris has a certain name for itself. You say, you've never been to Paris, but today you went to Paris, because there's something there that there's something about that city that denotes something, whether it's immoral or not, and you've entered that. So he said, until now, you never went to Seir, but for now, you've completely entered because you've learned the ways of Seir, right? Hachitnan, didn't we learn in the Mishnah, which is our Mishnah, if you find that it is locked, you know that there's someone in there, in order to teach us some life etiquette. A person should not go into the bathroom when someone's there. So basically, he was complaining. Why did you tell me to come inside? I was coughing to see if someone was in there, so I shouldn't go inside. And you tell me, come in, no problem. I'm not busy. So Rav Savar, the reason, the Gemara explains Rav Safar's reasoning. Rav Safar thought Dilma Masukanhu. He thought that maybe he was in danger. He heard him coughing outside. He thought maybe he was in danger. It was in the middle of nowhere, and so he told him, "Come inside." What kind of danger was he in? Kedetanya, as we learned in the Mishnah, Rav Shimon bar Gamliel Eimer, the great sage Rav Shimon, the son of Gamliel, said, "Amod hachayzer." If you hold in going to the restroom, if you hold in if you hold in, and what's the correct term? Let's get the actual translation here. A column of feces is held back. If you hold in from behind, maybe it's adam lidei hidrukan. A person can come to contracting the disease called hidrokan, which in English is edema. Silan achazer, if you hold in from the front, the urinal, maybe as adam lidei irakun, can bring a person to contract the disease of irakun, which is jaundice. So he thought that this person was holding it in for a very long time. He thought that this was very, very, this was a sakana. This was a danger. This person was in danger. So he said, come in. Okay. So what does it teach us? It's just a nice story? No, it's actually come to teach us a few things. Number one, that at the time, holding in the bathroom could have been fatal. We're talking about a time when medical advancements were very, 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 very we're talking about real ancient times, and people took their health very seriously in that way. And by the way, we should also learn to take our health very seriously. What?
The base price, which should be in the 2242. You have enough.
So that's number one. But you know what? Halacha actually learns out. This is not just a good story in the Talmud. Halacha, when it comes to learning laws of proper etiquette and proper behavior, is actually going to learn from this Gemara something. Don't hold in going to the restroom. It's an actual halacha. You cannot hold yourself in. It could bring, it's detrimental to your health. And doing things that are detrimental to your health are inappropriate, even from a halachic standpoint. So that's just a very interesting story. Amalei, another story. Once we're talking about proper etiquette, hygienic etiquette, let's say another story. Amalei Rav Lechiabrei, the great Amaraic sage. Rav told Chia, his son, Amalei Rav Huna leRava, and Rav Huna said the same thing to Rava, the same piece of advice. Berei, his son, Chashich, when it grows dark at night, Takin Afshech, You should take care of yourself, relieve yourself. The kadim, and before it gets light, before the morning rises, taken nafshech, also relieve yourself. Why? Because so the reason is because if it's during the day and there weren't proper restrooms throughout, just go to any restroom you need. There's definitely at home, there's a shul, there's restrooms all over. We live in a society that there's restrooms wherever you go. I mean, one time you're traveling and there's no restroom, you all of a sudden start freaking out. But back in the day, there were no restrooms anywhere. You had to find yourself a corner. You had to find yourself amongst the trees. You had to do what you had to do. And if it's during the day when there's many people out and about, it could be quite hard to do so. And if a person has a little bit dignity, which Judaism, expects, it shouldn't be in front of other people. So you're going to hold yourself in, and that's quite detrimental to your health. So the advice is that while it's still dark and there's very few people out and about, okay, there was no such thing. There's no such thing as nightlife back in the day. There was no street lights. So people live during the day. At night, you're at home. Day, you're outside. So at night, it's a perfect time to go out when it's still dark before it becomes light, and also at night to take care of your needs. Okay, let's continue with another statement of hygiene. Okay, when drinking, the Amoraim these two Amoraim instructed their sons further. Shtaif ushsi shtaif v'achis. When you're drinking wine, make sure the cup that you take, you rinse it first, you drink from it, and then you rinse it afterwards and put it back in its place. Okay, rinse twice. Which again, we live in a very, very, very high hygienic society. We don't appreciate, it's very hard for us to appreciate what people went through back in the day. Showers were once every 3 months. Like this is just, the very fact that a woman goes to mikvah once a month, the very fact that men back in the day went to mikvah multiple times a month, and maybe even if you're a Kohen, you went to mikvah every single day, was a complete anomaly. It was like that. The Jewish people were known to be extreme. You guys are like extreme hygienics. Like, something which they take for granted now. Everyone takes a shower once, twice, 3 times a day. I don't know. People nowadays people just showering left and right. But back in the day, it wasn't like that. And the same thing is with utensils. If you use a cup, you put it in the dishwasher. Back in the day, you wash the cup once a year, maybe. So the Amoraim were instructing their sons when it comes to wine, make sure you rinse it before and after. And when you drink water, which doesn't necessitate cleaning the cup completely, you don't need to go that far. If you're drinking water from a cup, make sure you pour out, at least to rinse the rim where your mouth touched, and then you could give that cup to your student if they want to drink from that cup after. Okay, and they bring a proof. These are Amoraim. They're bringing a proof from the Mishnah. They say, as it says, a person should not drink water and then just give the cup like that to his student straight away, unless you pour out from that cup to clean the rim. And a story once happened to someone, he drank water, and he didn't pour out from the water, and he gave it to his student, Talmud, and that student was an istinus, which is a term for a person who is a very delicate, extreme, very particular person. They can't eat everything. They get very nauseous from non-hygienics. It's a term for, and it's actually a halachic term. A person who is very, very, very particular is called the istinus. And he didn't want to drink of the meis betzama, and he eventually died because he was so thirsty, meaning that he was such an istinus that the student was so particular that he wasn't going to drink water. And by the way, you should just understand the context here. A student never spoke up in front of their teacher, never left the hall in front of the teacher. Even if they were so thirsty, they stayed in their place. They didn't go anywhere. Up until the point where he literally died from thirst, because the teacher had given out the water, and the student didn't want to drink it because he saw that there wasn't, the teacher didn't clean out the rim of the cup, and he literally just, maybe he died in the moment, or he fainted and then eventually brought to his death. But that you could just understand the tremendous awe that students had to the teacher, something which we don't understand, which is unfortunately lost. Such awe. I mean, over here he should have spoken up, but whatever the case is, that Ba'isa Shah at that time, the sages says, Amru, they said, a person shouldn't drink water. They enacted a new thing, a new protocol in the schools, that you shouldn't drink water and just give it to your students without properly cleaning out the cup. Unless he cleaned out the cup. Rav Ashi said, Hilkach, therefore, Hai Talmida, a student, the shafech kamei rabbe, that spills out some water before his teacher, leispe mishum afkirusa, there's no chutzpah involved in that. You understand what kind of enactments of protocol they're establishing here? That a student who sees that his teacher did not fulfill the previous protocol of cleaning out the rim of the cup before giving it over to the student, if the student notices that, and then takes the cup and spills it out himself, wash it out himself, which would indicate a tremendous chutzpah. That's what we consider chutzpah. Now chutzpah is the kids and the students could do everything up until they throw knives at their parents. Oh, that's chutzpah! You threw a knife at me. Back in the day, you looked at your teacher wrong. It was chutzpah. That's how much of discipline we're dealing with here. Okay, so if a teacher gives the student a cup and the teacher himself didn't wash it out, the student's gonna wash it out. Chutzpah? No. Says Rav Ashi, you got to do what you got to do to make sure it's clean, because we cannot have scenarios over here where students are going to literally pass away due to the negligence of the teacher. Okay, then they continued some other etiquette, some other good advice when it comes to eating. Kol mili loy tiflut ba'perabach. Anything that you're eating and the food causes you to have a lot of saliva, it's that kind of saliva, you're not allowed to spit it out in the presence of your teacher. It's disrespectful. Except, there's two exceptions. Bar, except mikra v'daisa, a gourd or porridge. The kapsila shel aver damu, because if you keep the saliva in your mouth from porridge or from gourd, then it is like having a lead, like having a bar of molten lead in your mouth. That is how dangerous it is for your health. So you should spit it out even in front of your teacher. Okay. Now that we end these statements from the Amoraim, I'm just, I know it's 8 o'clock, but let's just go a few more minutes for this fascinating piece of Gemara. We mentioned going back to the guardsmen. The guardsmen would stand around at night, and now the Mishnah didn't tell us what they do. They just stood. We're going to give a little more context. What happened at night? Okay, so we're borrowing from a Mishnah in Midos, back to that tractate of Midos, a very, very fascinating Mishnah. Listen to this. Not awesome. We learned in Midos, Ish Harabayas, there was a man who was called the man of Harabayas, the man of the Temple Mount. He was in charge. He was the custodian, the person in charge of the Temple Mount. Hayamachazar, called Mishmar, he would constantly throughout the night go check on the guards. And his servants had lanterns, had lamps, which were burning before him. And any guardsman who didn't stand up before the commander was coming by, and the man of the Temple Mount would say to him, Shalom Alecha, peace upon you, which is the ancient way of saying Shalom Aleichem, right? Shalom Alecha, peace upon you, hello. And if he did not reply, then obviously this person's sleeping. He would beat him with his stick to wake him up. A guardsman cannot sleep on duty in the king's palace. And he even had, if the person was such a deep slumber, he had permission to burn his garment. Until people would say, people who were out at night would say, Ma kol ba'azara. What is the voice, the noise, the screaming I hear from the courtyard in the temple? Kol ben Levi Leke. This is the voice of a Levite who is being beaten. Abgadam Nisrafim, and his clothing are being singed. Sheyashin le'ala mishmar, because he fell asleep on his guard duty. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says, Pam achas matzei es achi ami yashin. One time they found the brother of my mother, my uncle, Yashin, who was sleeping, the surface ksusai, and I could testify, yes, they burnt his garments. Okay. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba. Rav Chia bar Abba says, Kimati Rav Yechanan Baha, when Rav Yechanan would say this Mishnah, Rav Yechanan would explain this Mishnah, Amar Haki, this is what he would say, Ashreichem l'rishonim, how fortunate are the previous generations, Shafilo Ainis Shina, because even on an inadvertent sin, a Shina, which is, a person that immediately fell asleep, he didn't mean to go to sleep, it's inadvertent. Oisim din, they discipline him. Shalayal Ainis Shina, if a person sins not on an Ainis, not inadvertent, intentionally, Allah has come, how much more discipline is that person given? Okay, now we're going to pause over here. And we learned a lot of etiquette. We learned a lot of interesting statements. And we also learned what happens at night to the guardsmen of the temple. And we're going to continue in the next class discussing some more statements that pertain to rebuking and giving punishment and discipline as wisdom from the sages of the Talmud, because it's connected to what we just read in the Mishnah. We are very excited to announce that already by next class, we are going to be by the next Mishnah. That means we would have completed an entire section of the Gemara. And you guys did an amazing job. I think we did a great job. Already by tomorrow, we're by the next Mishnah. We are on course to finish this tractate very, very, very soon.